Hi, I'm Mike Moore. I'm Executive Vice President of Essex Aviation. I'm from West Palm Beach, Florida. And today's panel, I'd like to just have our other panelists come up. All right, I'll have everybody just introduce themselves, going down the row, and then we'll get started.
Hi, I'm George Galanopoulos. I'm CEO of Luxaviation UK.
Hi, Darren, Broderick, CEO of the ACAM group based out of Singapore.
Hello, this is Alexander Vagacs. I'm chairman for Avcon.
Hello, I'm Svenja Wortmann, Managing Director at DC Aviation Group.
All right. Alistair, thank you for the introduction. I don't really consider myself a poacher, but, you know. I will say that, you know, somewhere last summer I was talking to Alistair and I was just, you know, giving him just my experience in aviation. I won't bore everybody with it, but spending a lot of time in the aircraft management world, you know, been at it over 30 years, but 17 years in aircraft management. I said to him one day, my first day working at Essex, I literally was like a kid on Christmas morning the first time that we sold an aircraft, and I was getting to like sit at the table, but with a client, and I could hear what all my competitors had to say. Because for years I would, you know, self-critique myself of what could I do better in the room? Like, what are they saying that I'm not saying? How can I make a difference? And you know, now here was my opportunity. So over the years, the last 5.5 years, I have listened to everybody's sales pitch, you know, several times. I could probably start my own late night show imitating everybody of what they say, exactly when they say it, you know, in the presentation. But I have come away with a couple things. And one of the things I've learned was, you know, in brokering airplanes and going into aircraft management, everybody gets into the room, and a lot of companies have a great sales pitch. They sound excellent in the room. They say all the right things, and then after the deal is done, the aircraft goes to the management company, and if you stay on as a consultant, which we tend to do, or even if we're doing aircraft management changes or selections, things of that sort, you really get to see behind the curtain of, you know, they sound great in the room, but now how do they live up to what they said in the room, and how do they handle those accounts moving forward? And a lot of companies do a better job than others. What I found is, like, it usually comes down to communications. One of the things on the panel in our pre-discussions was, do you think you should engage the management company early? You know, we were all, of course, like, yes, you should engage the management company as early as possible. And, you know, and we try to. But more to the point, it's not just engaging them early, it's engaging them and then having them start the process early. It's one thing to say, I'm gonna go with company A as my management company in January, and then you kind of make that decision and move down the road, and somewhere in April they get a phone call saying, we found the right plane, we got it into a pre-buy, we're gonna be out in the next 4 weeks, I need a crew, I need this, I need hangar, my first trip is March 1st, and now the management company's drinking from the fire hose, so to speak. So I think it's important to engage early, but also have them involved in the process, and we'll talk a little bit about that. On the management side, I would say today we'll talk about 3 specific things. The first thing being the presentation, how brokers choose a management company. How do they choose the management companies that they're gonna put in front of their clients? And, you know, like, I get it, this is a very relationship-driven business, and there's a lot of companies that they give a lot of their leads to the broker gives a lot of their leads to the management company, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I would say that my experience on the management side was that the majority of the brokers were transactional. They did a great job on the transacting of the aircraft, but when it came to management companies, you could tell when you're talking to them that they never read your proposal. They never did any kind of, you know, A to B to C comparison with their client. They were kind of just like, here's your 3, and if they were forced to make a choice, of course, they gravitated towards the people that, you know, friends and colleagues and you know, referral sources and things of that sort. So my general thought was when I got into the acquisition side was how do I want to be the guy that I want them to have a great ownership experience. So when they sell the aircraft 3, 4, 5 years from now, I want to be the person that sells it and buys them another one. That's the name of the game. So how could we help brokers do a better job? Not the transaction. You know, there's a lot of people here with a lot more experience on transactions than me, but on the management side. So today we'll talk about the presentation when you go in to meet the clients, and then we'll talk about the onboarding process, and last we'll talk about communicating with the management company, the brokers, and how that's an important relationship moving forward. So I would say, you know, George, what are your thoughts on when you're going in to present to a client? Who do you typically bring to the meeting with you, and do you communicate with the broker on, you know, who are they going to bring to the meeting with them so you're prepared?
Yeah, typically we establish first who is the client going to bring. Is it the UBO? Is he his finance director? He's someone that's got maintenance, like technical experience, and I'll take with me the right person. It could be our key account manager, it could be our CFO, or a head of camo, if they're very technical minded. So you need to bring the right people depending who we're meeting. And that comes down to you. You need to tell me who I'm going to meet.
Sure. Anybody else here have any thoughts on it, who they like to bring? Svenja?
Yeah, I think it's very crucial and important to get prepared. And that's why what you just mentioned, that we really need to understand who will be there from client side so that we can be optimistically and optimal way prepared. Mm-hmm. And you just mentioned that you bring certain, you know, key account manager, camo manager, technical guy, whatever, financial guy to this meeting. And I think that's very important also to bring the people who will be the focal point of contact in the future. Because it doesn't make sense, you know, if the client, for example, gets to know the camo guy or one of the salesperson, and once the aircraft will be phased in and will start its operation, then there will be a change in the communication process. So that's it's very important, I think, to get well prepared, to know who will be in the room, and that you just do your homework before that.
Sure, no, I agree. I think when I go into those meetings, it's not just self-serving for me. I want it to go well for the management company and for me bringing my client in. And you know, if the client is very focused on generating charter revenue, I'll reach out to the management company and say it'd probably be a good idea that you have somebody from your sales team there that can kind of like articulate how they generate their revenue. And you know, everybody does well in good times, but you know, can they maintain those numbers with the cycles in the market? Or you know, if that person's very, you know, safety conscious, you know, make sure, you know, bring your safety person with you. If he's bringing this CFO, you want to make sure you bring somebody from your accounting team, or at least somebody that can walk them through the whole, like, here's our management, you know, here's our monthly statement, here's what it looks like, here's what you can expect. I mean, I've often found that, you know, everyone's like, yes, we could do that, we could segment this, we could segment that, and then all of a sudden, you know, 2 months later, everybody's going like, we can't really do that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And the more information you have beforehand to get prepared for the meeting, the better. For example, if it's a client from, you know, the French region, then of course we should, you know, put our focus on, you know, demonstrating what type of experience we have with the French region. For example, we have an FBO in Nice, and then of course, the more information you have about the final buyer, the final client, the better you can get prepared. And yeah, that's I think important for the meeting.
So I would say probably another big thing is that I try to do on this side of the table now is try to go in, you know, make sure my client has the right airplane, they're with the right aircraft management company. I've often found that, you know, we deal with all the top tier management companies. I wouldn't recommend one that's not. And you know, I think it's important that they'll all do a great job, but some of them are a better cultural fit than others. And I think that the brokers need to understand that and recognize that and kind of pair them with the right management company for them. And I think that has a tendency to work better. How do you guys handle situations like that? Or does that even come into your realm of decision making? Like when you sit with when a client comes in, do you ever look at them and just say, this person's not for us? Because I know that everybody says that, you know, if they're not a good fit for us, you know, we'll just walk away if the account's not a good fit for us. But I could say as an aircraft manager, there's plenty of times where I sat there saying, I don't know if he's a bad fit, but he's not the best fit for us. But at the end of the day, I really need to sign up an airplane. So like, we'll make it work. Like, we'll get back there and we'll get everybody on board and we'll make it work. So.
Yeah, but Mike, I don't think there's a single operator over there that's going to turn a client down. Unless you have some information that it's a pain in the ass with someone else, and you really don't want him. I think every one of us, we bite your hand.
I've had
really,
a few that'll
to get
say
the
no
operator.
in the before they get to the meeting. But how do you handle? Have you ever sat in an aircraft management meeting with a client and then afterwards called the broker up and said, like, I don't think this person's a good fit for us?
Have you?
No.
Yeah. So I mean that.
I think that happens.
Yeah.
I think that happens. There's some customers that you simply cannot afford to have.
Sure.
So, and sometimes you only find out after the first meeting or so, yeah? And if there's a big split between the expectation that the customer has and what you can deliver, then obviously the trouble is foreseeable. So you don't want to get into this at the end of the day. If he has expectations that you know that you cannot meet, it's not really worth to do the exercise at the end of the day.
But I think what happens quite often, happened to me several times in the past, is when you have an owner that's already with another operator and is looking to change. The first question I ask, what is the problem? Why are you looking to change? Because if I can't fix it, I'm wasting my time. So that's the only time you say, not for me, stay where you are, because I can't do any better. Because your expectations are no reasonable.
I've walked down that road a few times. I had a client that came to us and just said, like, we're leaving this company and we're going there. And then after I sat with them and listened to what they had to say, it was like, I got to find a nice way to say, like your management company's not the problem. You're the problem. I mean, like, and you're paying me to be. I'm independent. You're paying me to be honest with you, but like. You fly 600 hours a year, you're never gonna get this amount of charter. They didn't mess up your maintenance. They sent you 17 emails, you didn't respond to any of them. I mean, if you fire me, you fire me. But like on the consulting side, we make our money on sales and acquisitions. The consulting side is kind of the grease that makes the machine go. And, but the most interesting side of our business. So I agree, I think brokers or consultants have a responsibility to kind of bring that information to you and not just, you get to the meeting and you start hearing all the reasons why they're unhappy and you realize that there's really nothing you can do to change that,
Classic case is when someone comes to you and says, my current operator is not doing enough charter.
Yeah.
They promised me 400 hours a year, they've done 200. And when you dig into it, you realize they've got 2 pilots. Well, 2 pilots are not going to do all the honest flights and 400 hours charter. And he's refusing to employ a 3rd or a 4th pilot.
Yeah.
You know straight away you're on a lose here. You're not going to succeed. So what's the point of signing an agreement?
So when you're in a meeting, when you go into the presentation meeting, do you take that as an opportunity to kind of like dig into it with the client of, what are their expectations? How do they fly the airplane? Are they, commercial, non-commercial? Are they looking to generate charter revenue? How much? If it's a lot, okay, how do you expect to handle that? I mean, I can tell you on the consulting side, I've had dozens and dozens of people come to us and, well, this is what we were promised, and you look at can I see the budget they originally gave, and you look at it and you're like, wow, like there's, you're gonna have Wi-Fi? Yeah, well, Wi-Fi's $100,000, that's not on here. I'm like, you have, 400,000 for 2 pilots, you're gonna need at least 4 pilots, and you can't get them for, this price right here. So, I mean, like, sometimes you gotta go in that meeting and really have an opportunity. But I've also found that before you get to that space, it's helpful to have some of those conversations with the consultant or with the broker. If the broker's making a referral, kind of like to answer most of those questions. I mean, I'd never like to be surprised when I'm sitting in the room. So, and if ever any of you run into those situations where you're in there and you're looking at somebody and saying like their expectations are just far off, and do they adapt? What's your experience? Do they adapt or do they not?
Well, the opposite, if the owner comes or the UBO comes with a consultant, then typically that should have been handled by the consultant already. So the expectation should be at arm's length. If he doesn't come with a consultant and he has basically his own expectations that he has developed over time, and he maybe was sitting over his spreadsheet and has calculated an ideal scenario, maybe based on some thoughts that he was given, then that's a problem. And then obviously you have to tell him, what is realistically possible and what's not. And sometimes it's a painful process that he understands what can be done and what cannot be done. Like, if he expects to fly his aircraft 500 hours, 600 hours with only 2 pilots, that's not realistic. Because at the end of the day, he will end up with no pilots, or he has enormous cost of pilots running away from him again and again and again, because there is a typical setup for pilots, and we all know there's a scarce of pilots, not only in Europe, but in the United States and everywhere. So you have to be at arm's length and somehow at marketable rates what you offer to the pilots. That's what it is. And if you are outside of this box, then you might find pilots at the initial phase, but 6 months later, you end up with having new pilots. And that's, especially in the commercial operation, it's enormous costs. You change pilots is a huge cost factor with OPCs, with the checks and everything. And this is something maybe that he has to understand, that cheap is not really cost effective at the end of the day.
Oh, I agree. I'll end the first part about like the presentation process with saying I've always felt that what I try to do, not everybody's receptive to it, but I always try to tell my clients, like, well, who do you recommend? Let me see their budget. Let me see their proposal. I always recommend, why don't you just meet with all 3 of the companies first? Look at their websites, meet with the companies, see who you like the best. Who do you like working with? Because the economics are going to be, it costs what it costs to own and operate an airplane. I mean, if you're dealing with a bunch of tier 1 management companies, they're all relatively going to be the same, right? These people do a better job shopping fuel. These people get better rates at flight safety. These people have better fleet insurance policy, things of that nature. So we'll move into the onboarding process. So now you've won the deal. You get the airplane. We get done patting ourselves on the back, and then you settle in to make it happen. And I think that the first 90 to 120 days is absolutely critical especially with new entrants into the market, like setting their expectations, but coming in and sitting down with them of everything from here's how long it's going to take to crew your airplane, here's how long it's going to take to get your LOAs, here's how long it's going to take if you're flying ops in the US, here's how long it's going to take to get it on your 135, here's what you can expect. I also feel like it's critical when looking at the monthly statements to me, I think the very first monthly statement you hand a new client is the most important one, right? Because they all look at the budget, but they all have selective amnesia. And I think when they get that first bill, a lot of them look at it, and a lot of them call us to say, I trust my management company. It's just that I get this bill every month for $250,000, and I have no idea what I'm reading. I'm like, I have no idea if this is, is this an annual cost, a monthly cost? So, Svenja, why don't you walk me through your onboarding process?
Well, that's a very good question, but if I may, jump a little bit back early in the process,
sure. Yeah.
Because I think it's also crucial to have a very close collaboration and partnership with the client, and that's why it's very important to enter into the process as early as possible. Because if you have a stable collaboration, a trustful collaboration with the client, then I think it's easier to have this onboarding process. For example, if the management or operator company gets into the process right from the beginning, then we can also do, for example, technical inspections for the client, taking, green aircraft if it's a new one, or final delivery inspections or pre-purchase inspections, for example. And this is also a means to gain trust from the client. And if you do a good job with your experts, team of technicians, engineers, etc., then I think it's a good starting point for your collaboration and entering into the second phase of the partnership with the client, naming the phase-in process. So I'm fully with you that the critical phase is, the 90, 100 days.
I wasn't trying to rush you, so I'm staring at that clock right there.
Yeah, but I think it's good for an operator to step into as early as possible again to,
sure.
Have a close, or to build up a close collaboration with the client as early as possible. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and I think we all know from the different registration we offer to the clients, of course there are differences with the certain air authorities, and this also makes a change for the client, for example, whether it's a quick one or it's rather a lengthy process in getting the aircraft into ops. But I think, of course, the sooner the better. I mean, that's needless to say.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And but again, and we also mentioned this point earlier in our talks. That's the communication, or the dedicated persons who will talk to the client. And I think it's also very good if the client has one focal point of contact, so one face to the customer, one dedicated key account manager who will address all the points, all the topics which are open, which need to have clarification from the client side beforehand. And so at least that's our philosophy, and I think you all agree to that, and you have the same philosophy as well, that if you have one face to the customer, one dedicated key account manager who knows the client best, then that's very good for the complete partnership and collaboration.
Perfect. Anybody else want to join in and talk about the onboarding process, how they handle it at their company? Or
Well, I think it just depends on who's the customer and what is his experience. I mean, is he a first-time buyer? Is he a repetitive buyer? Does he get a new aircraft, a used aircraft? Is he just changing operator? That's so many different scenarios that there is no rule of thumb, like getting involved early enough. What does it mean? Yeah, he's changing operator, there's no early enough, it's just changing operator, that's it. Yeah, and you have to manage that. Does he have experience, so he knows what's going on with the aircraft? He knows, startup costs or what it costs in order to get the operation and the pilots onboarded and stuff like this? Or is he like coming from, nowhere and he's just buying an aircraft and he, doesn't know where he ends up with? Then he might be much more inexperienced on one side, but obviously he needs much more guidance in what is the different steps and what does he expect in the first 30, 60, 90 days as costs, initial costs maybe, for the, again, training of the pilots or maybe maintenance on the aircraft or something like this. Naturally, if it's the OEM, the sales director, or if it's a broker on a used aircraft, plays an important role because we don't know what he was telling and how he was selling the aircraft to him. Is this something that, he just blended out all these additional costs and just tries to close the deal? Fair enough. But then we end as an operator, we end up in educating the customer that it's an expensive tool that he just bought, yeah, and it's not the purchase price we are talking about. Or did he already get some guidance on maybe upcoming maintenance and costs related to that and stuff like this? So I think the more we can on buyers of aircraft, the more we can cooperate with the sales director or the broker in that respect and pick up where he was basically handed over and information where he ended up with, then this is quite helpful.
I would say, a lot of the things that we're talking about up here relate to, aircraft management companies and, and like, I'm sure the people in this room, yes, but like, we're talking about like reputable brokers dealing with reputable management companies. But, sometimes you find yourself in a situation on the consulting side where people come to you and they haven't dealt with reputable brokers, management companies. I've had people come to me and say like, hey, I bought this G4SP for, $6 million, and they told me they were gonna fly, I was gonna fly for free, and, by the way, last month they told me that the engine overhauls are due on both engines, and I'm not on a program, and, can you help me? I'm like, listen, I can hold your hand while they play the music on the Titanic, but like, it's not gonna end well for you, So I think that, part of this is, we're dealing with a reputable group of individuals, but a lot of times you find yourself,
can I ask you, one question? You ask how soon we want to be involved. We want to be involved.
Day one, yeah.
So yesterday.
Agree.
But from the broker's point, when would you engage an operator?
As soon as we've all read the articles, assemble your team. I would say as soon as somebody decides, Mike, I want to buy an aircraft, now I've already been talking to them. In my mind, at least, I've already been talking to them. I kind of already have in my mind who I think would be a good fit for them, and I engage them immediately. And it's, like I said, not just, hey, you're going to go with company A, but you should go with company A, start working on the management agreement, get an LOI in place so they can start looking, might be a 90 to 120-day lead time to hire crew members. So if you want us to have you into service with an airplane, it's not just buying the airplane, it's having the management company, having pilots to fly it. So we engage those people like day one. I think it's the most important thing. All the other things can be worked out in real time. We've all done closings where everybody's jumping in at the last minute, from the attorneys, the insurance people, and operations, and how we gonna move the airplane. Like, that's all stuff that's chaotic, but is always resolved, you know?
Yeah, we find more and more that a broker would delay engaging an operator because they probably don't want necessarily the operator's opinion, the honest opinion, because they got a certain aircraft in mind, a certain aircraft type, and they fear that the operator is going to mess the deal up.
Well, you know, it probably goes back like 5 years ago, but somebody was on the panel here before, and they made, and I'm paraphrasing the numbers big time here, but they made a comment like, last year there was, 1,900 transactions took place, and I can remember sitting there thinking to myself, like, okay, if you take out like all the big brokers of how many transactions they're doing every year, and then you say to yourself, like, well, who's doing all the other transactions? And on our side, we see that a lot. I think the reputable brokers and consultants will engage people immediately, but unfortunately, the other half of your clients are dealing with, like, well, Jim's got 150 hours flying. Like, Jim's my guy. He's helped me buy the airplane, or he's been my real estate attorney for 20 years, or, my charter guy, he's great. He knows everything about airplanes. He's going to walk me through this process. I'm like, your charter operator was a barista at Starbucks 2 years ago. Like, I don't think he's qualified to kind of walk you through the transaction. But you're right, it does happen. So I think as aircraft managers, for new entrants into the market, you're hoping that they're with a good broker, a good consultant that's holding their hand. If it's somebody that's making a management change, I always looked at that from the point of view of people buy an airplane, they go with a management company, it doesn't work out for whatever reason. There's a lot of great management companies out there. There's a lot of management companies that are nothing but pain throughout the whole process. And I always feel like those are the people that decide to leave, and then they come to us. So immediately you're dealing with people that are already looking at you and saying, you guys are all dishonest. Like, all management companies stink. They don't do a good job. And I think that when that happens, it's a tough hill to climb. But I think that you got to really sit in those meetings and articulate to the people, like, here's what we do. We've all talked about aircraft management fees and how it's like the one thing that everyone focuses on the most, and it's the most insignificant thing, in my opinion, right? You're buying a $40 million plane, and you're like, well, they'll do it for $1,000 less. And I said jokingly before, I'm like, I'm sure I could get somebody to cut my grass at home for $1 less. But I mean, like, I kind of like the guy who does it. So I do think that you really have to make it a point in these meetings to articulate to people, here's what we do. Here's what we do from a global operations perspective. Here's what we do from an accounting perspective. Here's what we do from a sales perspective if you're looking for charter, from a maintenance oversight and a maintenance breakdown. I mean, I know you have your mechanic and he's great at fixing airplanes, but if you break down at 2 o'clock in the morning on the Ivory Coast, I mean, you're gonna benefit greatly from being with a larger management company that kind of has a brain trust of mechanics that can help solve that problem, even people that have, people in different time zones around the world or better relationships around the world. It's obviously, it's a very global business.
I think the selection of the right type of aircraft is as important. And for that, I think you need an operator, 2 or 3 operators at a very early stage before you even sell an aircraft to a client. Because what we see more and more, a client will come to us with his CJ2, just sign an LOI, and he expects the aeroplane to fly to Dubai and back, non-stop, and then makes our life difficult. So I think, obviously, you've been an operator before, so you know more or less. You can manage the expectations, but the average broker out there has never been an operator.
I agreed.
And that's the problem we get. That the client, by the time he comes to us, by the time they engage us, it's too late. It's
Absolutely.
already bought the aircraft.
And it's a major issue that generally I find with, we deal with a certain amount of brokers and then ad hoc guys that come with a deal for us. But we are generally involved far too late. And when you're selling something, you're good at selling it. The sales guy has pitched this aeroplane. He's told them how much it's going to cost them per hour to operate. Yes, you can fly from here to there. And then, as George said, the reality is, number one, it doesn't cost that to operate. It costs a little bit more than that. quite often a lot more, especially if they get the information from an OEM glossy brochure. But more so on the selection of the aeroplane, again, as George said, you know. We had a guy recently, you know, he called me and he said, they told me I can fly this 650 ER from here in the United States to here in India non-stop. And I just laughed at him. I said, no way. And he was so insistent, I said, I'll run the flight plan, I'll show you. And of course the result wasn't good. But he was so close to buying this aeroplane simply because he'd been convinced that yes, he could do this mission with that particular aircraft. So it's, I find we're generally bought in far too late. For me, first-time buyers, of course, are the hardest ones because they need the education. They need a lot of your key personnel to sit with them and their key personnel to explain the process and explain how long it takes, how long it costs, or how much it costs. Seasoned buyers, repetitive buyers, not so bad. They've kind of got it. They get it. But yeah, we generally, I had a guy recently, he'd gone right through the APA process before he even contacted us to come in. And his LOI was a mess, his APA was a mess, and who inherits the problem? It's the operator.
It's interesting. Sometimes when people come to us, we have to, you know, find a delicate way, like these people, you know, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. And then you look at the management agreement, you read it, and you're like, did anybody read this thing? I'm like you agreed to all of it. Like, you know, it's not their fault. Like, they negotiated a way better deal for themselves than you did. Yeah.
I think what Darren is saying, we rely on you
Sure. Agree.
to bring a client that's educated enough so you don't make our life. We have to live with this guy for years. It's like marrying someone, I guess. You have to live them for years. So you need the base
Listen,
at the beginning.
I can guarantee if you're working with me, when they come to you, like I've already, like, this is what I'm doing for you on the transaction side, but let me walk you through the aircraft management experience, and it's part of, you know, how we operate, just breaking it down for everybody. And like, here's what you can expect, everything from picking the right airplane. I've been in the aircraft management side where you know, they come to you in the last minute and they're like, oh, we're gonna fly this airplane charter. And I'm like, does this airplane even have a flight data recorder? And they're like, well, we'll deal with that after the thing. I'm like, and some brokers, like, they don't even want to they don't want to do anything that will cause the deal from not going forward. And then you ultimately end up with a, you know, well, they told me, you know, I need a flight data recorder. It's going to cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm like, that's something that should have been looked at, like, during the vetting process of the airplane. Not now. You own it. There's really nothing you can do for it except embrace, you know, the fact that you're going to have to pay for it. So
it makes our life easier, I think, dealing with a broker rather than direct with a green client.
Agreed.
It's very difficult to educate someone where Darren does a quote, you do a quote, you do a budget, and our budgets are vastly different. And the client, the first thing he looks, oh, the fuel, you told me the fuel is going to cost me £2,000 an hour. Darren told me it's going to cost 1,000. We buy the same bloody fuel. You might be able to save a penny or two, but it's not going to save him that much. Having a broker that can explain that, it makes our life a little
Believe me,
difficult.
it's-
As long as you're not biased. That's the first point you made, because a lot of the brokers are biased because they go to an operator they believe they can get more business from.
Well, that was part of my whole relationships things in the beginning. But I've had situations where people say, like, well, you know, we got this pro forma and it, you know, had this fuel price, you know, and you look at it and say to yourself, like, well, yeah, their fleet average is, you know, $3.80 per gallon, but they have X amount of airplanes and they do a lot of Europe flying, and they're collectively they're buying cheaper fuel. You fly from Boston Logan because you refuse to go out of Bedford, and you fly to Aspen. Like, you're never gonna see $3.80 fuel. You're gonna be like north of $6 everywhere you go, just because your flight pattern. But I think people just get so hung up on the numbers, which is why in the beginning I'm like, meet with everybody, decide who you like, and then we'll walk you through what they can do for you. I think in my opinion, what we do anyway is we prepare a budget, and I approach it from the mindset of, like, I'm gonna manage this airplane, everything, not just here's what it costs for the flight training event. I'm like, well, if you have 5 pilots, that's 10 training events a year. You gotta fly them there, you gotta hotel them, you gotta feed them, like, it all adds up at the end of the year. So I do think that's an important, a very important process. We only have 5 minutes left, so we could go on forever on this topic for sure. So I'm gonna move into the last phase of it is communications. And to me, I think this is important because you sell an aircraft as a broker, it goes to a management company, and I do really think that people should, there should be a two-way communication going between the broker and the management company. You know, do you involve the broker when you're doing their annual budget? Like, you know, maybe the guy went in thinking he was gonna fly 100 hours, but he flies 300, it's gonna change the budget. Are you recommending modifications or upgrades on the airplane, or is he thinking about upgrading? I think it's good to bring the brokers in, and I think they need to stay in the loop because they want to be involved for the next transaction. But I also feel like sometimes we help a lot, like way more than. I think sometimes people don't reach out to the broker because they're afraid they're going to get bad information. But I can't tell you how many times I would go back to people and say, like, well, yeah, that's right. And I had one client, I said to him, I was like, you know, Dave, I'm consulting for you now. I said, you know, when I was pitching you for your business as a management company, you went to a different management company 6 years ago. I said, I'm telling you, you're paying me to tell you the same exact things I told you before. And he just said, yeah, but you know, you're my guy now, and I'm paying you, and I trust you. So I think it's very important to have that communications going back and forth. Are there questions up there?
I think there's some questions on the. We don't see them here,
I can't even
but
read
they're
them.
here, so maybe we can go through them quickly.
Well, we're too late for number one, you know? Do you want me to read these out one at a time? We'll say, let's see. What does your digital workflow look like? Your clients may have this. Is this a differentiator? Have you adopted, and how does it support customers? Anybody want to jump in? Can you guys even see these from where you're sitting?
Well, I think the flexibility issue is more, you know, it depends on the people that are involved from my point of view. So if the key account managers or the people that are involved are flexible ones, then it's good. If they're not flexible, then obviously the operator is not flexible. So it always depends on the people who are involved, and that's regardless if it's a big operator or small operator, I would say on that one. And the other question was obviously if we have experienced customers changing between each of us. Yes, we did, I guess. The owner, you know, why owners change operators? Obviously, most of the time it's loss of trust. So for whatever reason, you know, and that can be, you know, a justifiable reason or not, or someone has done something wrong or not. But most of the time, owners change because they lose trust into either the people or the operator as a company. That's what we see.
That's true, but sometimes it's only just a question also of aircraft registration. So, for example, if the the range or the destinations change, which the client want to use, for example, in our case, the German registration doesn't work anymore. So this can also be some of the reasons why a client changed. But yeah, I'm fully with you. Normally, it's the trust which is lost.
And that's not pointing fingers. It's just what it is. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's people's business at the end of the day.
That's true. That's true.
Do painless aircraft transitions exist?
No.
Next. Anybody want to deal with that? No, we'll go on to the next one. Have you already experienced?
I think the digital workflow, this is, maybe we are still a little bit of a virgin industry in this. Obviously, most of the digital processes are within the company, like maintenance, flight planning, dispatch, and all those processes. And obviously then that goes into the CRM software that you're using, and how do you communicate with the customer in respect to the CRM software? How do you personalize your services to him? How do you send out information? How easy can he have access to the information that you provide to him? Does he have a tool where he can always get access or not? That's most of the time, that's a digitalization that we're seeing. Hopefully, yes.
Yes.
And no race to the bottom.
Anybody want to handle that one? That's an interesting question.
Well, I think it's a competitive environment, so of course operators will undercut each other. I think it's a dangerous game to start doing zero management fees, hoping you're going to get your money from charters. We find what the client tells you is going to happen, it doesn't usually happen. When he says, I'm going to fly 200 hours a year, and I'm sure you can do 400 hours charter, but it depends how those 200 hours are spread. If they're spread over 200 days, because he flies 1 hour a day or he goes to weird destinations, keep the aircraft there, you're not going to do that much charter. So you can't count on just doing charter and make your money. You have to charge a reasonable management fee. And for me, a good operator will save the owner more money than what he charges.
Agreed.
Yes, and I think you mentioned this point earlier. For a client, he will just compare the amount of the management fee, because that's the amount which he thinks can assess. But in reality, I mean, we all agree on that point. We have the same cost structure, and we provide the same service quality. And of course, this cost. So if one client comes to us and says, "I want to have this for free," I think it's also not professional, because he wants to receive a good bundle of services, and of course they cost, and they are they, for example, if you have your own OCC, operational control center, etc. I mean these are high personal costs, or CAMO team, etc. And if you do it in-house, then of course it costs. So I think that if a client comes to us, and of course we would never say no to a client, so I think we all agree on that as well. But I would be, be some kind of suspicious if this question would arise to say, can you provide your services for free? No, we can't, because it's just not possible, and it's not professional either.
I would always say to the client, if someone does it for nothing, don't you think they're going to make their money somewhere else?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It might be the fuel, your maintenance, a kickback here and there.
Exactly.
So you'd rather be transparent and say what you charge. And $1,000 here and there is going to make zero difference. Some people get it. And when you explain to them, or you say, when you sit in front of them with the right people, with your key account manager, your CFO, and take them through the whole process, how many man-hours per month you have to spend on his aeroplane, then they get it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, interestingly, there was a survey there about the race to the bottom of management fees, and we're all experiencing it, of course. Particularly in my part of the world, in Southeast Asia, there's a lot of newcomers and little startups, breakaways, pilots heading off thinking they can do it better, and of course they have no overhead, they have no systems, they have nothing in place. But I think as a whole, when we talk about management fees, any tier 1 management company global is within nickels of each other in terms of our costs, our proposals. And our outlay, our overhead is increasing as we're required higher levels of compliance and so forth and so on. So for tier 1 management companies, as I say, I think we're all within a group, and we won't go down. We can't go down because we have our overheads. This is one of the good things, one of the interesting, and I tell clients this, you're financing your asset. Who do the finance companies choose? Do they allow these tier 3, tier 4, whatever you want to call them, companies, or do they say, here's your list of operators that are approved by us, and it's all tier 1 guys?
No, I agree. Yeah. No. Trying not to talk a lot now. I didn't realize the questions were behind me. I can't see them on the screen. I saw these two smiling. I'm like, what's everybody laughing at? We're up on time. Yep, we're up on time. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate everybody listening to us drone on, specifically me.